ladies, here we are again, talking about the most important topic for the entire rest of your life, menopause. When you think about it that way, it takes on a whole different meaning, doesn't it? This channel is all about managing your menopause your way, and we're in the middle of a great big unit on osteoporosis. This one is video number 218, and it's all about calcium with a little bit of magnesium sprinkled in. In my book, this material is in chapter 29 under the section entitled Vitamin and Mineral Options in either book, the first edition or the second edition. But I will present a much more detailed presentation in this video than what you're going to find in the book. You know, this book is already quite thick, and there is just no way to give you the detail in my book that I can give you here. So even if you have the book, be sure you watch this video. And even if you think you already know about calcium, I'm going to bet that you don't know everything I'm going to teach you today. You may even discover that much of what you thought you knew is all wrong. Sometimes the things about which people talk the most are the very same things about which they know the least. And that tends to be the case with calcium. Now, video number 216 addressed calcium in the form of foods. This video will focus on calcium in the form of supplements. And I'll just start by saying that calcium is the most abundant mineral in your body, and it's the fifth most abundant element in your body. 99% of your calcium is stored in your bones and teeth. And you're born with about 25 grams of calcium in your bones, and that 25 grams increases to about 1,200 grams between birth and adulthood. But it doesn't continue increasing past your 40s, and therein lies the problem when you reach post-menopause. So most women need to ensure that they get enough calcium as they age. So here are all the things I'll be addressing with regard to calcium. Different kinds of calcium, necessary dosages of calcium, absorption of calcium, effects of calcium on your bones, calcium side effects, calcium's interactions with other substances, and finally, the issue of coronary artery calcium. We'll start with the different kinds of calcium. Now, when I refer to the different kinds of calcium, what do I mean? Are you wondering how there can be different kinds of one single mineral? Well, in the case of calcium, the calcium is essentially similar, the same, but what changes from one kind of calcium to another is what's combined with the calcium. So instead of having isolated calcium all by itself, mostly what you have is really calcium salts. If you look at most calcium products, what you will see is that the calcium is usually combined with something else. Look at all these different kinds of calcium salts. There are so many of them. Calcium carbonate, calcium citrate, calcium phosphate, calcium chloride, calcium citrate malate, calcium acetate, calcium ascorbate, calcium succinate, calcium fumarate, calcium lactate, calcium gluconate, calcium lactate gluconate, coral calcium, oyster shell calcium, and dolomite calcium. Now, fortunately, you don't need to know about all of these. I like to simplify things for you, so that's what I'll do when it comes to calcium. I showed you the entire list, but I'll narrow it down to the ones you need to consider, because if I don't, someone will always ask about a calcium that I omitted. So for purposes of managing your menopause and osteoporosis, here are the calcium salts that matter. I've highlighted them in red on that same big list I just showed you. Calcium carbonate, calcium citrate, and calcium phosphate. Aren't you relieved? These three are the only ones that will suffice for purposes of supplements that can benefit your bones. Calcium carbonate, calcium citrate, and calcium phosphate. For all of those that I excluded, one or more of the factors that we are going to discuss today is inadequate for purposes of using it for your menopausal needs. So you're left with just the three: calcium carbonate, calcium citrate, and calcium phosphate. It's like that game. Stone, paper, scissors. Which one wins for you depends on your specific situation and goals. Each one is the winner in certain situations. It's just like when you play stone, paper, scissors. Each one wins sometimes. And there are specific details about each of these that may matter to you in terms of which kind of calcium is best for you. Of course, there isn't one that's best for everybody. I cringe whenever someone asks, what's best? You are the most important factor determining what's best for you with regard to just about everything. And depending on your situation and your goals, one kind may be better than another kind. So as we address each of these kinds of calcium, we'll create one of our nifty charts that summarizes all the information in one place. Here's what our calcium chart will entail. First, I'll tell you what the chart entails, and then I'll explain each factor. What you see in column 1 is the kind of calcium. The second column designates the dose and dosage requirements. The third column designates absorption. The fourth column designates how much elemental calcium each kind of calcium provides. And the fifth column is for any specific comments about the calcium. Now, I just want to make sure you understand what each of those factors represents. First, our dose and dosage. Many people confuse the two terms, dose and dosage. Dose refers to how often you take a substance. It's about frequency. Dosage refers to how much of the substance you take. It's about quantity. So you might take 3 doses a day at a dosage of 500 milligrams each. Next is absorption. In other words, how well your body gobbles up the calcium. Absorption is different for different kinds of calcium. And calcium from food is better absorbed than calcium from supplements. That is a basic principle of supplements in general. Calcium is also better absorbed at night. And calcium absorption decreases with age, while urinary excretion of calcium increases with age. Are you seeing how all the things I taught you about bone turnover in videos 196 and 197 are coming into play here? You accumulate calcium into your bones until your 40s, but after that, calcium starts leaving your bones. Next is how much elemental calcium each kind of calcium provides. Now, this pertains to how well your body processes and uses the calcium. And again, it differs with different kinds of calcium. And the fifth column, comments, you know what comments means. Now, once this chart is all filled in, it's going to help you choose the best calcium for you. And you'll be able to print it out and take it with you to the vitamin store or the pharmacy or wherever, and it will function as your little cheat sheet. So let's go through each of these, and I'll tell you what's better and worse, good and bad, advantageous and disadvantageous about each of them. And you'll see that, like everything else in the world of menopause, it's all about trade-offs. Okay, first is calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate is the most common and the least expensive form of calcium. It is moderately well absorbed on an empty stomach and fairly well absorbed if you take it with a meal. And when it is well absorbed, it provides higher quantities of elemental calcium than any other form of calcium, a whopping 40%. But this great absorption is limited if you happen to have high stomach pH. In other words, if you don't produce much stomach acid, which just so happens to be another typical effect of aging. Oh, and with that good absorption also comes gas. You need a total daily dosage of 1,500 milligrams of calcium carbonate. But because calcium carbonate delivers such a high dosage of elemental calcium, if you already get a goodly amount of calcium in your diet and you take this supplement with meals, you might be able to shoot for a total dosage of 1,200 milligrams. So this explains why you sometimes see dosage requirements as a range. It always depends on your diet and on the kind of calcium. So here's calcium carbonate on your cheat sheet. Actually, I always cringed at the term cheat sheet. As the quintessential nerd, I couldn't imagine cheating. But in retrospect, I guess I actually learned everything by making myself a cheat sheet, otherwise known as one of my charts, and just memorizing it. Okay, next is calcium citrate. Calcium citrate is the second most popular form of calcium, especially in the elderly. And this is because it's much better absorbed than any of the other forms of calcium, even on an empty stomach. Once again, as you age, your stomach becomes higher in pH. In other words, you don't produce as much hydrochloric acid for digesting your food. And that's why you start noticing that you just can't tolerate some of the foods that you used to love. Well, if you don't produce much hydrochloric acid, it's difficult to digest calcium carbonate, which is the most popular and cheapest kind of calcium. And because calcium citrate is more easily absorbed, you can take it on an empty stomach. Of course, you can take it with meals also. So if you have any kind of digestive issues like bowel diseases or absorption disorders, take calcium citrate. But you're going to pay the price in a different way. It's more expensive. And you only get 21% of elemental calcium with calcium citrate. And because it only supplies 21% of elemental calcium, you may have to take a higher dosage to get the same benefit that you get from calcium carbonate. Trade-offs, trade-offs. Here it is on our cheat sheet. Finally, we have calcium phosphate. Calcium phosphate is very easily absorbed by your body, and it doesn't matter whether you take it with food or not. It provides nearly as much elemental calcium as calcium carbonate. It's 39%. The big benefit of calcium phosphate is that it doesn't cause gas or constipation like some of the other kinds of calcium do. And you pay a little bit for the luxury of not having gas with a higher cost than the cheaper calcium carbonate. But hey, that's why you need this education, to learn about all these options. You get to choose the one whose qualities you value most. It's like stone, paper, scissors. So here it is on our cheat sheet. So, calcium carbonate, calcium citrate, calcium phosphate, stone, paper, scissors. Now, with all three of these kinds of calcium, you need a total of 1,500 milligrams daily. But your body can only absorb 500 milligrams of calcium at one time. This means that you need to take 3 doses a day. 1 in the morning, 1 at midday, and 1 at night. If you get some calcium from your food, but not enough to reach the 1,500 milligrams daily, then you can use calcium supplements to compensate for the deficiency. But most women actually get less than half of the calcium they need from dietary sources. On the other hand, you should not take more than 2,000 milligrams a day of calcium, because that dosage increases your risk of kidney stones. Now, let's talk about the effect of calcium on your bone. Dietary calcium, whether it's from food or supplements, is necessary throughout your lifetime. And most of the time, it serves to improve bone quality. Quality, not quantity. But listen, it is not effective at preventing bone loss in menopause. This is especially true in the early years of postmenopause, the first 5 to 10 years. of postmenopause. The first 5 to 10 years is the estrogen window of opportunity. The fact is that both calcium absorption into your bones and calcium excretion by your kidneys both depend on estrogen. So when you lose your estrogen at postmenopause, they both go haywire, and you lose in 2 ways. So do not make the mistake of thinking that you can prevent bone loss by taking calcium. You cannot. You can make your already existing bone stronger, but you can lose strong bone just as easily as you can lose weak bone. And for some women, taking calcium while they are losing bone due to estrogen deficiency actually makes things even worse. If you'll recall video 199 on bone structure, I taught you about the 2 different kinds of bone in your body. There's cortical bone and there's trabecular bone. Cortical bone comprises the long bones of your arms and legs and ribs, as well as the flat bones of your skull and your pelvic girdle. And it contains more calcium than the trabecular bone that comprises the round bones of your spine, hip, and wrist. But you learned that all of your bones actually have an outer casing of cortical bone on the outside, with the trabecular bone on the inside. Well, because the calcium goes to the outer bone on the outside, the cortical bone, it makes the outer casing stronger, but it leaves the inner trabecular bone weak. And the result is that cortical bone becomes more brittle the stronger it gets, and that can cause a fracture of the bone. So taking calcium to strengthen your bone while ignoring anything to increase the quantity of your bone can backfire on you. This is why I emphasize the quantity versus quality distinction so heavily. However, if you do something to prevent bone loss and you get adequate calcium, you can reduce your risk of osteoporosis by 30%. This translates to 32% fewer spine fractures and 43% fewer hip fractures. And as you age beyond the first 5 to 10 years of your postmenopause, calcium's benefits on your bone can actually increase. There's just something about that first 5 to 10 years of postmenopause that has such a significant effect on so many things. So don't make the mistake of stopping your calcium either. No matter what, be sure you get your 1,500 milligrams of calcium daily for the rest of your life. Just don't ignore the things that address quantity, especially early in your postmenopause. Okay, now let's talk about side effects of calcium. The majority of people tolerate calcium supplements quite well. However, some people will have gastrointestinal symptoms like gas, constipation, or bloating. This is why it's good to know the things that I put on your cheat sheet. All calcium supplements are not equal in their tendency to cause these gastrointestinal symptoms. Calcium phosphate is best if you have any GI problems. And going on to drug and nutrient interactions, one of the things about which most people are unaware is the fact that calcium can interact with certain nutrients and drugs. The result of these interactions is very commonly decreased absorption of the calcium, but sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes the calcium decreases the absorption of the drug or the nutrient. Here's a chart showing you these interactions and the ways in which they interact. Here you see that fiber, H2 blockers, which are for reflux, heartburn, and indigestion, proton pump inhibitors, which are also for reflux, heartburn, and indigestion, and anticonvulsants all decrease the absorption of calcium. While calcium decreases the absorption of iron, zinc, magnesium, levothyroxine for hypothyroidism, bisphosphonates, which are SERMs that I discussed in videos 34 and 35 and will address again in video 225, and the quinolone antibiotics. Caffeine and sodium increase the excretion of calcium in your urine, while thiazide diuretics decrease it. And finally, calcium with digoxin can increase heart arrhythmias. And for the sake of completion, let me just say a couple of things about the issue of coronary artery calcium deposits in your heart arteries. For every conversation about calcium, someone always asks, what about calcium buildup in your heart arteries? In video 175 on coronary artery calcium and heart attacks and menopause, I explained that the calcium that ends up in your heart arteries is due to aging. In other words, as you age, you get calcium deposits in various parts of your body. Your heart arteries are one of them. So are your breasts, and so are your joints. The calcium you ingest from food does not travel to your heart, and neither does the calcium from supplements. However, once again, you are much better off getting your calcium from food. And be aware that, as with everything in medicine, you will find some studies claiming that calcium supplementation does increase coronary artery calcium. Stuff like that really bothers me because most people get all caught up in the minutia of it. There's really a very simple solution. Just eat the right foods that contain vitamins and minerals, and you don't have to worry about it. The ironic thing is that the people who get so worked up about it are the very people who eat so much junk and processed food that they have to rely on supplements for their calcium requirements. If they worried as much about what they were putting in their mouths in the first place, they wouldn't have any need for concern. Okay, as I did with the previous videos on options for managing osteoporosis, here is a T-score scale with an indication as to where calcium supplements belong. Like all the other vitamins and minerals I presented in the last video, calcium falls heavily in the area of prevention, with only a tiny bit of benefit in the realm of intervention. So despite all the talk and attention that calcium gets, it really isn't as magical as most people make it sound. It serves the purpose of keeping your already strong bones strong. It cannot and will not prevent osteoporosis, and it certainly will not fix osteoporosis. As long as you use it for its intended purpose, you will be in good shape. Just don't try to make calcium something it isn't. Okay, and then, for the sake of real completion, I'll say a few words about magnesium. Magnesium is just a piggyback to calcium. Its only purpose in bone is to help your bones make better use of calcium. But without magnesium, calcium cannot do its job on your bone. So calcium and magnesium are an inseparable couple. That is why you will see a lot of supplements that combine the two. You need 400 to 1,200 milligrams of magnesium daily in order to complement your 1,500 milligrams of calcium daily. Generally, the ratio between calcium and magnesium should be 1:1 or 2:1. So there you have it with regard to calcium supplements for preventing osteoporosis. The summary is as follows. Calcium improves the quality of your bone, not the quantity. You need 3 500 milligram doses of calcium daily. Use calcium carbonate with meals if you have enough stomach acid to handle it. Use calcium citrate on an empty stomach if you have low stomach acid. Use calcium phosphate if you want to avoid gas. The first 5 to 10 years of postmenopause is a time when calcium does very little to prevent osteoporosis. Calcium can interact with certain foods and drugs to limit absorption or excretion of one or the other. And calcium works in the arena of prevention and intervention, not fixing of osteoporosis. Magnesium is calcium's partner in that it's a piggyback to help your bones use the calcium. You can find our little cheat sheet in the link just below this screen that you're watching, or you can go to my website, menopausetailor.me, where you'll find all the charts I've made for you, and you can schedule a consultation anytime. We're going to keep working our way through this unit on osteoporosis, and next week we'll talk about vitamin D. You'll learn some things you didn't know, and despite all the talk about calcium, vitamin D is way more important for your bones. Okay, subscribe to my channel, follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and with that, I bid you goodbye.